Welcome, everybody, to our Hope Connect session on families and stigma. I'm Antoinette Gavel-Ouellette, and I am the Stronger Together Canada Program Coordinator for Mom Stop the Harm. I'm also a Métis woman who resides in unceded 2 territory, the land of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Anishinaabe, Assiniboine, Dakota, and Dene peoples, the homeland of Métis Nation. My Dakota name is Wakia Shanka Wakawi, which is White Thunder Horsewoman. So we're going to start today. I would like to introduce our elder, Susie McPherson Durende, to start us off with an opening prayer and some words. Susie? Susie, we can't hear you.
Hello, everyone. I'll start with some words in Cree. I bring greetings to you from Brandon, Manitoba, Canada. So I'll start. Kisemantu gananaskamatana naskagisaga. Sawinamanan gaminopimatiak. Wichihinan ganawinamanan. Anoswabake gamadatugisigao. Wichihinan ganawinamanan. Kakinoni nanan gajuas masa napewak squawak. Squaresasak ewa nabesasak. Minanan enanosoan egomino machihoan. I want to acknowledge the ancestral territory of the Indigenous nations who were and are here on these lands. The 600 plus Indigenous nations that were here across Canada prior to European contact. Unique and distinct societies with their own languages and systems of governance. Living, surviving, and thriving people who knew the land, the waters, the skies, the patterns of weather and animals, who looked after themselves, each other, their communities, and who saw themselves as a part of creation, always and lived as such, always mindful of the generations to come. And so we look to the east, the south, the west, and the north, and we acknowledge all the Indigenous nations across the land. And we give thanks for their ancestral story, truth, and wisdom that has helped them to this day. So we acknowledge how the story unfolded over time. We turn full circle to the east, and we give thanks we acknowledge all the nations who now call this place home, those who came as settlers, guests, visitors, immigrants, newcomers, refugees. And we acknowledge their story too, and all of our stories, and how our stories are connected to the Indigenous worldview story that was happening here prior to contact. And so we give thanks for this time together, the purposes for we are gathered. We acknowledge each one's story, each person here, and each of our stories, for all that we hold and carry, for the journey that each one of us has been on to this time. And we say, Egusane, Ninanaskamon, Gachinona Wachamaganat. And I kind of like to sing this welcome song. It's a gathering song, a song that acknowledges the spirit of all the directions, including above, below, and within. And it's a song that grounds us and centers us to this time together. And also a song that welcomes the spirit of whatever any one of us needs here this day, whether it's a spirit of courage, hope, peace, love, acceptance. And so I'll sing. I would usually have a drum, but I'll sing for each of the directions. Hey ya ya ya, hey ya ya ya, hey ya ya ya, oh hey, oh hey, hey ya ya ya, oh hey. E-I-I-Ya, 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 oh hey, oh hey, E-I-I-Ya, oh hey, E-I-I-Ya, 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 oh hey, oh hey, E-I-I-Ya, oh hey, E-I-I-Ya, 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 oh hey, oh hey, E-I-I-Ya, oh hey, E-I-I-Ya, 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 oh hey, oh hey, E-I-I-Ya, oh hey, E-I-I-Ya, 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 oh hey, oh hey, E-I-I-Ya, oh hey, E-I-I-Ya, 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 oh hey, oh hey, E-I-I-Ya, oh hey. So I sang that 7 times for each of the 4 directions, and above, below, and then within. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. That was beautiful. Thank you. I am still working with the different screens to be to be recording from. So I'm a little bit glitchy on that right now. And there's a few more people coming in. So I just wanted to say just a few things right now about the Stronger Together programs. For those of you, some may know and some may not know, is that Mom Stop the Harm has the advocacy side and then the program side. On the program side, Stronger Together BC started a year before the Stronger Together Canada, and they received their funding from the BC government. And Stronger Together Canada receives or has been receiving funding from Health Canada from the SUOP grant, which is substance use and addictions. And they've helped us get these connect sessions started and continue to keep them going. So we just wanted to give a brief acknowledgement. And the programs that Mom Stop the Harm offers are the Holding Hope, which are for families that have a loved one still struggling with substances. And we also do Healing Hearts for families who have had a loved one pass due to substance-related harms. And I'll be popping some of that information in the chat so you can find out more, or you can always email me as well. So right now I would like to introduce our moderator, and it's quite heartfelt. I've gotten to know Emily over the last 3 years when we started, and she's a powerful voice and such a huge, compassionate person that brings so much wealth and knowledge and caring and kindness to everything she does. Emily joined Mom Stop the Harm in 2008 after her son suffered some life-threatening but preventable harms from substance use. The way he was treated in the healthcare system, especially while he was actively using, is what drove her to advocacy. She served on the board of directors for 3 years with Mom Stop the Harm and facilitates 2 Holding Hope support groups. Although her son is currently in recovery, she continues to advocate for change to drug policy or against the development of more harmful policies, and strives to provide a safe and non-stigmatizing space for families whose loved ones are currently struggling. Welcome and thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Antoinette, for your kind words. I did want to make one correction. It's 2018 that I joined Mom Stop the Harm. Not
Okay.
2008.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. So yeah, thank you for that. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm joining today from New Brunswick, which is the home of the the Wolastoq, the Mi'kmaq, and the Passamaquoddy peoples. So today's format is going to be that each of our 4 presenters are going to have about 10 minutes each to present, and then we'll start taking questions. So you can put your questions in the chat window at any time, and then once everybody's finished, then we'll move on to the questions. If you want it to be, specific to one person, just make sure that you put that in the chat, because we're, like a question for Alexis, here's what I want to know. And that way when we ask them at the end, we'll be able to differentiate them. So I guess if everybody's ready, we might as well get started. It brings me great pleasure to introduce Alexis. She's our first speaker. And so Alexis's introduction is in her own voice, and so I'm just going to read what she has written for us. Alexis says, I am blessed to be the mother of 2 wonderful mixed race adult children. My firstborn was exposed to my substance misuse in the early years of his life. I became abstinent shortly before his fifth birthday, 30 years ago. My recovery, followed by my education, training, and professional work as a mental health and addictions clinician, lulled me into a false sense of security. I came to believe I was mediating against passing on this intergenerational problem, though I forgot to include all the potential for trauma my children might be exposed to. I also failed to acquire a correct understanding of the challenges my biracial children, especially my son, would experience, and I parented as a white parent. My ignorance, including my own unconscious biases, resulted in an inability to provide my son with the necessary tools to negotiate this world as a young Black man. I learned the hard way, and to my deep regret, so did my son, who has been severely violated and traumatized as a result. He continues to struggle, though we have a close and loving relationship that has improved as I came to better understand the realities people of color face in Canada today. I'm happily married to a patient and understanding man who is loved by my adult kids and who has been a loving and attentive stepdad. In recent years, he and I moved to rural New Brunswick, where we have a 10-acre homestead that we are developing slowly and on a shoestring budget. The goal is to establish several tiny homes for Airbnb and operate low-cost recovery enhancement retreats several times a year. Thank you, Alexis, and you can go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here in that strange way that we always have of acknowledging the pleasure of being here and being members of this unfortunate group. But I'm so grateful that this group exists. I need to share my screen, and I'm not quite sure that I can do that quickly and easily. So if you could just bear with me, because I've set up some items on here, and I just have to try and find where my screen is to share. Please bear with me. I could use a little help. Let me see. Share screen.
You look across the bottom and it says share screen. Mine is green.
Yeah, I found the share screen, but I'm having a really hard time finding my actual screen that I want to share. And I've only got 2 screens available on my board, but it's just not appearing where I need it to appear. And I ran a trial with Antoinette so that it would come up, and I just don't know what's going wrong here. I'm wondering if maybe somebody else could go while I try and figure out how I'm going to do this, because without it, I don't quite know what I'm going to do. I guess what I can do is just go and maybe move from this screen to my own.
Do you need your presentation, Alexis, in order to present?
I do. I didn't prepare any other way of doing this, so I really do need that. So maybe somebody else could go first while I figure out how I'm going to be able to do this and where the screen is that I need to share.
And if you minimize your Zoom screen, you don't see the one you need?
No. As soon as I hit share screen, the one that I need just doesn't appear to be there. So Zoom.
Okay, Alexis, do you want to email me the presentation? We'll go to Evie right now. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, that sounds good. So Evie lives in beautiful Treaty 7 territory, the traditional land of the Blackfoot Confederacy since 1877, and the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3 communities. Evie is the descendant of Italian settlers. Evie's a mother of 2 sons and 2 grandsons. She's been involved with the Holding Hope group since 2021 and has been a participant and a facilitator of peer support groups off and on for decades. She has extensive experience supporting, caregiving, and advocating for abused women, people with substance use problems, people with mental differences, and other socially marginalized persons. Evie has many years of lived experience with chronic illness and pain. She's a lifelong learner and an activist in various social justice issues. Evie has a multidisciplinary degree in gender studies. Okay, go ahead, Evie.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you to everyone here today, and of course to Mom Stop the Harm, just for everything. Stigma is a lot. I think most people know what stigma is generally. A definition used by Health Canada is a set of beliefs based on fear and ignorance that targets a specific group of people. I think that stigma is much more than what most people understand it to be. Stigma winds bits of its mistaken beliefs into many areas of our lives and affects us in many ways that are sometimes difficult to name. Stigma has a definite purpose in our society, and that purpose is to maintain the status quo. When it comes to substance use, stigma has a major effect on drug policy and drug prohibition. Through the media, government, medicine, the war on drugs, etc., fear and ignorance maintain drug criminalization, punitive treatment models, and soon it will mean involuntary treatment in lockdown. Stigma also works as a social mechanism to dehumanize people. And when you dehumanize people, you can refuse evidence-based interventions like harm reduction and safe supply, and you can enforce abstinence-only treatment as 5 or 6 people die every day from a poisoned drug supply. Horrendously, this is the case in Alberta, where I live. Generally, stigma works within a dominant narrative. There is a lot of misinformation about substance use and substance use disorder. Education has helped us change some of those beliefs from the territory of moral failure, bad behavior, and choice to an understanding that it is a health issue. However, there are still many treatments based on punitive models and many individuals who believe that tough love is the answer. I think many people still believe that parents are to blame. Stigma is widespread. It exists systemically, socially, and individually. And I, like probably many of you, have encountered stigma in each of these areas. And because it's so pervasive, it becomes a little risky to talk about. So we often use anonymity. But anonymity is paradoxical. When you keep your identity and experience secretive, people think you have something to be ashamed of. On the other hand, anonymity is often necessary to protect ourselves socially and even sometimes from our own families. Today, I want to talk about my experience as a mother of a son with substance use disorder, concomitant mental differences, trauma, and neurodivergence. My son is not public about his use, and so I will try to focus on my own experience. But as you know, my experience does not exist without his experience. This is difficult for me. My intention is to honor his privacy and talk about our journey in a way that might be recognizable and hopefully helpful to you. From the time my son was very young, I tried to find him help for his trauma and emotional struggles. It was extremely difficult finding anything that was helpful and affordable. Often I was not believed. In adolescence, he waited 2 years to see an adolescent psychiatrist who in the end did more harm than good. Public health care is not readily available for mental problems. I wonder how much of our inadequate and untimely mental health care is impacted by stigma. My son began using substances in high school, and he continued to use them for a long time. His use gradually increased, and when he was seriously unwell, I tried to find help for him and information for me. It was very difficult to find anything in both these areas. Throughout most of this time, my son lived at home with me and my husband, who is his stepfather. While this is not a choice that is available or maybe even suitable for every family, it was right for us. Generally, when I phoned rehab centers, they told me there was long waiting times. They didn't want to speak to me. They only wanted to speak with him. I said I was very worried he might die. And they told me that was often the case, very matter-of-factly. Call 911, they said. I was seeing a counselor through Alberta Addictions, and her best advice was to tell me to kick him out until he agreed to go to rehab, even though the wait times were so long. She told me that I should pay his insurance so he could live in his car, but to call the police if I knew he was driving under the influence of anything. I didn't take her advice. Shortly after this, my son agreed to get help, but he wasn't in any shape to make the phone calls or inquiries necessary. He and I both thought that he needed more than substance use therapy. He needed help for trauma and his other problems. After 3 weeks wait, he got into a psychologist with Alberta Mental Health and Addiction, who referred him to a psychiatrist, who we hoped would then refer him to a concomitant treatment program. After 3 months wait, they canceled the appointment because the psychiatrist was ill, and they told us to start back at the beginning, booking another appointment with a psychologist and moving on that way. My son gave up. I wonder how many of the difficulties associated with finding and navigating help are associated with stigma. Friends would tell us to kick him out or offer advice that was very judgmental. Some were cruel. Some friends would just become stonily silent while I talked about our situation and then would avoid me. I went to an Al-Anon group that talked a lot about enabling. I didn't go back to that group, and I stopped sharing anything with most people. I lost friends and became isolated. I began to read everything I could on substance use. I listened to newscasts, podcasts, and I watched documentaries. Most of the literature focused on treatment as the answer. Some said never let your adult children live with you until they've been abstinent for a long time. Most of them used abstinence in the 12 steps as a model for recovery. These always came with the familiar concepts of enabling and codependence. There were a few others that used the biopsychosocial model, others used learning models, while some focused on trauma. What I came to understand was that problem substance use is complex. It is different for every person. And even if you found a model in a book that seemed helpful, you'd probably never find anyone near you in medicine or psychology that knew about it. The one thing that was the most helpful in all of my searching was the concept of belonging. This was key. This made sense to me. Why is so much of our substance use literature and care missing the essential components of compassion and kindness? After the attempt to get concomitant treatment, my son stabilized for a bit while still using heavily, but then fentanyl entered the drug supply. I was checking on him all the time and trying to understand what to do. Many of his friends died. I thought about an intervention. I was put in touch with a woman who did interventions for one of the biggest private treatment centers in Calgary. I did not agree with her methods or her proposed treatment, and so she berated me badly until I had to hang up on her. She tried to phone me over and over again and text me. I had to block her number. Just after that, my son voluntarily went to the only public detox facility in Calgary. In my opinion, the model for this detox was completely based on punishment for both the family and the person who used drugs. They told my son they made it so terrible because they didn't want people coming back. We had to be there 2 hours early, which meant arriving at 6 a.m. We were coming from out of town. There was one bathroom for each gender, while close to 20 people were in different stages of withdrawal. My son was accepted, but 2/3 of the people were not. One mother collapsed on the floor when her son was not accepted. I tried to talk to her, but the security guard rushed us out. My son called me on the second day when he was in terrible withdrawal to tell me that he couldn't pay for his Suboxone prescription and that they couldn't access social supports. I phoned to try to pay for the Suboxone myself. A worker answered, and when I got as far as saying my son called me, she interrupted and said, "Oh, is little Johnny not happy?" He finished his 7 days at detox to find that we had no access to concomitant treatment. Again, how much did stigma play in the model and mindset of this detox facility? As a family, we decided to pay for private rehab that had concomitant treatment. It was unaffordable. We had to borrow the money. My son's experience was very positive, but his problems with substance use did not end. It has been 6 years since he was in treatment. How does stigma affect the one-size-fits-all treatment landscape? Does stigma affect the social acceptance of the outrageous fees for more comprehensive help? In the time since, I've had several humiliating experiences with doctors. I've seen 5 different therapists trying to find help with my experience surrounding my son's substance use and for other things I was going through. One therapist told me in the first 25 minutes that she couldn't help me, and it was obvious she didn't want to. Another told me in the first 50 minutes that I had no idea what boundaries were, and she disbelieved some of my experiences. I had some help from the others, but I have never had anyone that had a good overall understanding of this journey. Few, if ever, talked about the poison drug supply. No one discusses all the parts of our society that cause trauma in the first place. The last time I was looking for a therapist on the internet, I went through lists of therapists within traveling distance that stated that they worked with substance use. But they didn't say that they worked with substance use. They said they worked with addiction. And about 90% of those said that they also worked with codependence. Honestly, the most help and healing I have received was through the acceptance I found in my Holding Hope group with Mom Stop the Harm. It saves me. How much do therapists learn about all the aspects of stigma? And how much do they ask themselves about their beliefs? I loved what Dr. Carpenter said when he spoke about enabling codependence on previous Mom Stop the Harm webinar. He said we are all codependent. Everybody is. It's a non-issue. And he said that if we are doing a good job as parents, then of course we are enabling. We are enabling our children to find happiness and well-being. I think what has always confused me is that every definition or medical description of substance use disorder I have ever read, including the DSM, states that substance use disorder continues despite incredible losses in the person's life, loss of jobs, marriage, friends, etc. What that says to me is that painful consequences do not help. And when I put that together with the need for belonging, which is also the need for compassion and understanding, I become even more confused about how we treat people with substance use disorder. I wonder how big stigma really is. My son no longer uses opioids, but he is not abstinent. Some days he is happy, but on the whole, his life is very difficult for him. And the stigma he has experienced and internalized keeps him very isolated. Most people would not see the strength, commitment, and love that keeps him trying. I obsess over so many things I have said and done because beliefs based on stigma live inside me and they mess with me. But I practice every day. My practice is to become a really proficient, codependent, and enabling mother, a mother who loves what is. Thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you, Evie, so much for sharing. That was really, really, really from the heart. And I think, you said a lot of things that I personally can relate to, and I'm sure a lot of us here on the call can relate to as well. So thank you so much for that. Okay, so Alexis, are you ready now?
I think I am. I sent it over to Antoinette, and hopefully she'll get everything up on the screen for us. Okay, wonderful. Okay, thank you, Antoinette. This is great. So I wanted to talk today about stigma in our systems. And I think that we listened to Ellie and we heard her very eloquently sharing with us how stigma exists alive and well in various systems. In particular, today, I wanted to be talking about a very specific stigma that relates to race. But I just wanted to make sure that, we all are on the same page and understanding that systemic stigma, and I'll be talking about systemic racism in particular, exists in our educational systems, in our criminal justice system, employment system, housing system, in all of the systems of society. When we have biases, as we well know, it's going to impact in every aspect of life. So we will see the same kind of biases against using in the school system, in the criminal justice system, healthcare and housing. I thought I could make us move on to the next slide. Okay, wonderful, thank you. So I'd been wanting to draw attention to stigma and racism in systems that have affected my experience with my child. And it all began with the school system, where when anything was going wrong, my son was first identified and blamed. He ultimately ended up feeling like if he was always going to be blamed for inappropriate behaviors, even though he was innocent, then perhaps maybe he should just engage in some of those behaviors and gain some of the benefits of them. He wouldn't always get caught. So his rationale over time, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy when we start to treat especially young people in a very specific way with an assumption about who they are and what their character is, that every young Black person is a thug, then we start to have problems in self-identity and how we engage with life in general. So we think about how, what sort of stigmas may be a trigger for the substance dependency in the first place. I know that for my son, the constant sense that he was being identified as a problem when he was really trying to just be a decent human being was hugely problematic and impacted terribly on his sense of self and his worth in society. Next one, please. So one of the things I realized that, I came into this, I didn't become a parent of biracial children because I have contempt or dislike for people of color. Obviously, I love people of color, and my partner was a man of color, a Black person. Though he was somebody who grew up in his country of origin in Africa, amongst all other Black people, and he wasn't subjected to the same kind of things that our son was. So he wasn't really able to help guide my son appropriately, and nor was I. I couldn't tell him how to handle some of the experiences he was encountering. So I look to this triangle here of white supremacy when we look at up at the top there and the peak of the pyramid and see where all those obvious things were hate crimes, saying the N-word, maybe engaging in blackface, telling racist jokes. Those are all obvious things where we might recognize somebody as behaving in a racist fashion, or that we might call them a racist. But what about all the other covert, socially acceptable kind of behaviors? Colorblindness, for example, when we say to somebody, I don't see color, as though that's a compliment, as though saying to a person of color, oh, I don't see color, it means somehow that my failure to recognize your difference puts you on the same footing as everybody else, because it doesn't. So my failure to see a person's color simply deprives them and denies the reality that they are going to experience systemic racism. But it's not intentional. It's not something that you initially go out thinking is a bad thing. We think that we're recognizing and telling somebody that I embrace you irrespective of color when we say these things. There's so many other things that fall into those practices that we don't realize can be harmful to people of color. And I certainly didn't know or understand in any great depth. So in the beginning, I thought that as the little thingy over to the right here says, that determining racism was you either are or you're not. But in actual fact, that's totally on a spectrum. And I think that I had to learn this for myself as a white parent, and also recognize that others will also need to learn some of these things. So for me, anti-racism and learning and education has been critical so that I can better support my loved ones. Next, please. So when do I become a threat? I didn't know how to prepare my son. I get quite emotional around all of this because the consequences for this have been horrific. Next slide, please. The kinds of things, that Black parents, they have to have the talk. You have to have the talk with your kids, especially your boys. It's okay for the kids in the neighborhood to play hoppy nine doors or to hop the fence to get quickly through the neighborhood. But you tell your Black kids, don't do that, because the cops will be called. You'll be considered a potential burglar. You're going to be labeled as problematic. So white kids are just seen as kids playing. You see Black kids hanging around outside the convenience store, they'll get chased away. Whereas a group of white kids, well, they're just kids hanging out, harmless. When the police stop you, the way a young Black person must behave is extremely different than the way a white person has to behave. I think that many of us have heard of, the offense of driving while Black, that our Black brothers and sisters experience far more being pulled over, far more aggressive questioning by the police, and so on. So you need to teach your young Black people about how to respond appropriately to the police. Don't wear a hoodie. I had to let myself, don't wear a hoodie. And certainly if you are wearing a hoodie, you don't put it up, especially at night, because of who you're going to be perceived to be. And if the police do show up, what could happen to you under those circumstances? Next, please. So hate crimes in Canada. A hate crime is defined as a criminal violation motivated by hate, based on race, national or ethnic origin, language, color, religion, sex, age, mental or physical disability, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or any other similar factors. So on August 5th, my son was brutally attacked by two known racists, a couple of boys who had a reputation for spewing hate towards the young Black population in the area. And they decided that it would serve them well to take a baseball bat to this young man's head. My son was 16 years at the time. And when the police came to take me down to the hospital where my son was on life support, we passed the area where it happened, and it was cordoned off that they were holding it as a homicide site. We didn't expect him to survive. Thankfully, he did. Next slide, please. So, the white boys who were ultimately, they did get found and charged. And at the time when they were convicted of assault, they chose not to prosecute this as a hate crime. I don't know what the rationale for that was. The police felt that they wouldn't be guaranteed a conviction if they prosecuted as a hate crime, so they didn't. And when they were found guilty, the evidence was beyond, I mean, the hospital records enough proved the guilt, and that there were witnesses who had seen it all go down. The judge was awfully concerned. These were two brothers, aged 18 and 21. And the judge was very concerned that if they were to be sent and sentenced to a longer term and go to the penitentiary, what could this possibly do to two young men being sent to the penitentiary? So they got sentences of 2 years less a day for one of them. And the one who didn't swing the bat, but just kicked my son in the face and knocked all his teeth out, he only got a much lighter sentence that he had to serve on weekends. Meanwhile, shortly after, a year or so after my son was, in recovery and had lifelong mental health implications, was convinced by a group of others that he should be the one that goes amongst their peers and gets their money back. They had a conflict. They provided him with an old weapon, an old gun, no bullets, a weapon that didn't work, but nevertheless sent him in to sort things out with the peers. And he wasn't in any mentally stable condition to be making sound decisions, and he just wanted to fit in, and so off he went and did that. At his sentencing, well, first of all, legal aid lawyers. I couldn't finance a lawyer. My son had a legal aid lawyer and he wanted to call the shots. His lawyer, when I tried to speak to the lawyer and said, can we please speak with the Crown? We need to change the charge. He shouldn't be getting charged with assault with a firearm, because if you proceed with that charge, there's minimum mandatory sentencing. And at that time, there was minimum mandatory sentencing. The Canadian justice system has since determined that this minimum mandatory sentencing is unconstitutional, so it no longer occurs. Nevertheless, my son was prosecuted under the minimum mandatory sentencing, fresh with a brain injury. Minimum mandatory sentencing meant he had to go to the penitentiary. So the two white boys who put him in the position of having this inability to make sound judgment couldn't send them to the penitentiary, God forbid, but no problem doing that with my son, the black boy. And even then, when it comes to classifying black people in the system, they will be judged as more of a danger, so they go to maximum security rather than minimum security environments. And they are far more likely to be beaten and abused while they're there as well. And of course, while in the process of being arrested. Next slide, please. So long after my son was released from the penitentiary and has over the years become the negative consequences of his assault have he's been healing and being able to make better decisions, and he's continued in his substance use. Upon release from custody, he quickly became a problematic substance user. Understandably so. I believed he used substances while he was incarcerated, and that's where it really began for him. On Christmas Day of 2019, we came home and found him essentially grey, foaming at the... I won't go into the details because I think it'll be a trigger for too many of us. Nevertheless, when the first responders came, I found them to be less than respectful. They were asking, they were telling me, well, you don't look like a drug dealer, full of the implication that my son must be a drug dealer, that the quantities of substance that he had. And this is an issue that, because of the Good Samaritan laws that we have because of the fentanyl crisis, this should not have even been an issue. This should not have been getting talked about. And on that day when the cops left, we had Christmas money. We were going Boxing Day shopping the following day for new cell phones. So we had about $1,200 sitting on the table at the time. My husband had put a heavy item on top of it when the responders all started piling into the room, just so it could stay stable. I don't know why he didn't just pick it up and put it in his pocket, but probably because the police would have thought that he was up to no good. But surprisingly enough, that money just it disappeared. So we followed up on that after the fact, and of course, the police can do no wrong. So we didn't see that resolved. Next slide, please. So for me, when I explore our experiences and support my son, for the longest time, my son felt that and recognized that I hadn't truly understood what his experiences were. As he was growing up, there'd be times when I would advise him along the same routes as I would have done a white child. And I would say, when he was being persecuted, well, you must have done something. But he hadn't done anything. So he couldn't even find some support from his own mother. His father, too, didn't understand what the Canadian system was. He'd grown up and reached maturity as a Black man amongst a Black population. So he wasn't subjected to the same kind of issues that my son was. So now I recognize that what I can do is do what I can to grow my knowledge and understanding. Both of my kids now tell me that they see me as an ally. White folks, we don't tend to self-appoint ourselves as Black allies. It's not okay to do that. But I feel proud when my kids recognize that I've grown and learned and changed. And I really want to help other people because I know that my ignorance was not born of hate. It wasn't born of malice. It was born of, we don't know what we don't know until we know it. And so we might not be, any of us, overt racists. We might, none of us want to be behaving in ways where, telling racist jokes or using the N-word or any of these things. But the reality is that for many of us, we don't have much exposure to people of color, people of difference, and how we get to know those people is through movies, television, and Black people are very poorly represented in the media. So if all you know about Black people is the thugs and the dealers and the hardcore criminal rapping kind of stuff that happens, we don't always understand what's really going on. So my goal is to encourage others to learn, to look at anti-racism and go beyond Black History Month. And keep in mind, Black History Month isn't for the Black kids. I remember a time when I overheard a Black kid in my son's school say, I don't know why, every time I go into the Black History Month and any events that we're having here, it's always just the Black kids, and we're not the ones who need to know this stuff. It's the white kids who need to know and learn. So it is, when it's not my experience, it's not my lived experience to know what it's like to live in Black skin, then it's my responsibility, I believe, to learn what people are experiencing, just as we're looking across the board to become a more evolved nation, to be more diversity conscious and more embracing of the other. So that's what my family and I do to try and mediate in some ways against the kind of stigma that we experience specific to race, and this kind of capacity of always assuming that, well, what can you expect? When you've got a thuggish Black kid, of course they're going to get involved in that. Of course they're going to end up in jail. There is no of course about it. There really isn't. So that's really what I would like to share with everybody today, and to encourage everyone to take a step from time to time and question. And it may be that anecdotally that the only people that you've ever known who are Black might be not good people. But there's a world full of really wonderful Black folks out there, and we shouldn't paint them with the same stick as some of the awful people that we meet of all different races and all different backgrounds. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexis. I know we've talked lots of times and I've heard little fragments of your story, but that's the first time that I've really heard so much. And I feel like you could do your own full hour and a half just on this. And so I want to say I'm so sorry for everything that your family has gone through, but we really, really appreciate you coming and sharing today. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Next we have Tammy. So Tammy Talia, PhD, is an assistant professor in the Department of Community Health Science at the University of Manitoba and a research assistant at the Manitoba Centre for Health Policy. Her research focuses on the impact of trauma on physical and mental health across the lifespan, with an increasing focus on substance use and substance-related harms. She also has lived experience with addiction, both as a member of the recovery community and through the loss of a family member to fentanyl poisoning in 2018. In her presentation, she will discuss how experiences of different types of stigma, self-stigma, social stigma, and structural stigma have impacted her family. Go ahead, Tammy.
All right. Thank you. Well, my name's Tammy, and I'm really, really, really grateful to be here today. But I think I'm even more grateful that all of you have come here today. I think this is how we do make change and address stigma. I should also say I'm in Winnipeg. I live, work, and play on Treaty 1 territory, home of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the OG Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and on the homeland of the Red River Métis Nation. So I personally come from a family that struggles with all sorts of different kinds of addiction issues. One side, it's all gambling. Other side, it's all different kinds of substances. And it's interesting, like this kind of hierarchy exists in my family, where the gamblers don't think they have a problem at all. That's not even an issue, despite some pretty severe financial harms experienced by many. And so they kind of judge the people who have a problematic relationship with alcohol, my other side of the family. And that's been like my whole life, kind of. This side judges that side. But even in that side, many people use alcohol, and there's been health consequences associated with that use. But then they, in turn, kind of think they're better than people who use other types of substances. I like to call them currently illegal substances. So there's like all this judgment and hierarchy that exists in my own family. And I think that that's stigma, and it exists in the wider society as well. I think it's reflected there. To me, in reality, all kind of the same thing. In my family, personally, all these behaviors have led to many different kinds of harms for people. It's just really a different substance or behavior that's really different. So I'm here today, well, kind of my own personal journey, but also, as Emily had suggested, my family lost my niece, Destiny Talu, on November 4th, 2018, to an accidental fentanyl poisoning. She was 22 years old at the time of her death. And you know what? She did not want to die. She had just completed 10 days of detox 2 weeks prior to her death, while on a wait list for a treatment bed at a nonprofit treatment facility. The wait times in Manitoba at that time for publicly funded beds for women were approximately 200 days. And I think someone else, Evie might have mentioned, like $25,000 a time is a lot of money. So to me, the failure of our society and the failure of our leaders and decision makers to really acknowledge this current public health crisis, or to address all these gaps in care, are examples of stigma. They're stigma. We value certain people less as a society, not us maybe, but in the general society, than we value other people. So as it is common in the whole recovery and healing journey, Destiny relapsed during that wait and died as a result of our tainted street drug supply. Her partner at the time told us that they bought heroin, or thought they did. No reason to lie either at that point. And we found out months later it was actually fentanyl. There was like no heroin or other drugs in her system. And my niece did, in fact, engage in safer drug use practices. She was, in fact, connected to the harm reduction community. That said, we didn't have a lot of options in Manitoba then or now. Still, we're kind of behind the 8 ball in harm reduction here. And that toxic, I can't even, like 5 years ago, I probably would never said that, but the toxic street drug supply, this failed war on drugs, in my opinion, directly contributed to her death and the death of many other people in Canada and elsewhere. And I truly believe if she had had access to a safe supply at that time, she might still be here today. Harm reduction needs to be a part of that whole continuum of care. And I get so angry because there's so much politicization of that particular issue. That is really part of the stigma contributing to early deaths and a multitude of other harms. On a more personal level, like I said, I've been part of the recovery community for more than 2 decades. For me, over and over and over again, like way back. It was stressed that abstinence was the only way. From my time in treatment to the AA meetings I used to go to, from the different healthcare providers I came across. Today, I do choose abstinence, but it was really a long, not always abstinent road to get here. But really, it was the only, and I recognize that it's not the only way. I know now I likely made things more difficult for Destiny when she was struggling because I didn't fully embrace harm reduction, nor what I consider today to be the most effective treatments for things like opioid use disorders. So things like Suboxone, methadone, and things like that. I kind of did, but not fully. She knew better than me, and I should have listened more. Like, that is what I should have done. That's what I think we all have to do. In my own experience as part of the recovery community, I've been actually extremely open about my own alcohol use. I've probably said 1,000 times, hi, my name is Tammy and I'm an alcoholic. No problem saying that publicly ever, but I never openly or rarely really openly say that I use crack or other drugs like that or struggled with that. It's because I'm ashamed. I'm still ashamed. And that's that hierarchy all over again. Alcohol, acceptable, crack, not. I still have difficulty saying Destiny used heroin or that she was an injection drug user. But I think for her, not so much because I'm ashamed of her as a person. She was truly a remarkable human being and so much more than that, but out of fear of how she will be judged by other people. For me, I still struggle today with feeling ashamed and guilty for things that I did earlier in life, some things I never talk about. I could say that's because I don't dwell on the past or don't want to dwell there, but I think it's really about feelings of shame. It's that self-stigma. And that despite the fact that I've tried my best over 25 or more years to be a different person. It's also about how others relate to you, social stigma. So for example, I was really good in school growing up, but I struggled a lot with substance issues in my early adulthood. I don't know how many times in my life I was told how I wasted my life, all that potential was a waste. And even from the people closest to me, even recently, I joked to my partner, but it's not even funny, actually, that some of my family members today are far more likely to tell people that I've been arrested or about all the other troubles that I got in 30 years ago than they are to say I went back to school in middle age and completed my PhD. Like, that's the stories they tell people when people are around. Interestingly, one of the best examples of stigma that I experienced from the health system personally is related to the use of illegal substances, cigarettes. Years ago, when my mom's health was declining, I walked into an emergency department to visit her. A nurse on duty looked right at me and said she could tell I was a smoker because she could smell me from a mile away. I have never forgotten that comment. I'm talking 20 years ago now. I think about it every single time I walk into a room, and that's a legal substance. For my niece Destiny, there are many, many, many examples of stigma. Like I said, even I have difficulty saying that she used heroin or ever injected a drug. And that's really, like I said, I don't know, but it is probably me judging her and ultimately subscribing to that whole hierarchy apparent in both my family and the larger society. She reached out for help many times. For example, she entered detox in the hospital system, but it took 2 full days of sitting there to get in and sent home one night. I think it was really about judging whether someone was serious enough about wanting help. As soon as she presented to the hospital system, even before they were even accepting her or anything, they suspended her driver's license. That's really about punishing someone before they've even done anything wrong. Just because she used substances didn't mean she engaged in drove under the influence. Same thing happened to me years ago, so the system hasn't even changed. And I would argue the systems, all those systems that talked about never let you forget either. In my PhD program, I was humiliated when I couldn't pass a security check due to an impaired driving conviction about 20 years earlier. That took a few years to get all hammered out. February, I just had issues crossing into the US border because of those same charges, for which I have received a pardon. Truly a humiliating experience. And I was with my family. I can't imagine if I was with my work colleagues. Destiny presented also to the health system many, many times, sometimes for mental health issues, sometimes for suicidal behaviors, sometimes for substance use issues, sometimes for other physical health issues. Providers would sometimes refer to her as that addict with a dog, dehumanizing, and oftentimes did not take her concerns seriously. One time she actually had a seizure at the hospital within minutes of being discharged. She had arrived by ambulance with both kind of physical health complaints and mental health complaints. She was literally still in the emergency department when this happened. Had a seizure, they discharged her, had a seizure. And I don't know if they thought she was faking or if they really didn't care. All I know is that they didn't readmit her. The staff told her really nothing they could do, as nothing was physically wrong. So if she wanted additional help, she could go to the crisis response center, which here is like kind of close by, but it's still a walk in the middle of winter in Winnipeg, which can be -30 with no shoes, no coat, no purse, no anything. She was treated so poorly so many times at our main hospital in Winnipeg that she refused to be taken there at some point after an assault, and paramedics ended up diverting her to a smaller hospital. So she even missed out on some of the specialized victim services that are only available at our main hospital. I could go on, but I think most of us have experienced the same types of stigma when trying to access service and supports for our loved ones. But I want to say too, even in death, individuals and families experience stigma. So many well-intentioned people said so many harmful things, and then many less well-intentioned people said some cruel things. So I just want to end with saying that this loss has devastated my entire family. Destiny was full of life. She was full of love, and now she's gone. And I think that what makes me the angriest is that these deaths are preventable. We, as a society, not necessarily all of you, but have to do better. I can do better. And I think as a society, we all have to do better. And so thank you for letting me share my story with you today.
Thank you, Tammy. There was so much in what you just said, like on so many different levels and different types of stigma. And so just thank you for sharing that and sharing your own personal aspect of it as well. Thank you. Okay, and so our last but not least speaker is Tracy. Tracy Lockhart is a nurse with over 30 years of diverse experience. She's held several pivotal roles during her nursing career, including home care case coordinator, specializing in the operating room, post-anesthesia care unit, and preoperative assessment clinic. Her extensive certifications range from wound care specialist to occupational health and safety professional. A passionate, proud, and strong Indigenous woman, she advocates for all individuals, especially in rural and remote regions where access to services may not be readily available. Tracy works for Indigenous Service Canada in remote northern Manitoba, encouraging holistic wellness and community health. She's the mother of 3 adult children and encourages them to find the path to true happiness and health. Okay, go ahead, Tracy.
Thank you very much. Before I begin, I just want to have a little disclaimer. The following is from a personal perspective and does not necessarily depict any individual or institution. Permission has been granted from my children to discuss events as I perceive them. I'm very proud of them for allowing me to share in order to help others. I thank them for supporting me in telling our story. I'd like you to stop, close your eyes, have a glass of water handy, and I want you to picture this. You are diving to an unknown depth. Your tank is almost empty. You are in unknown waters. Take a breath. hold it, and wait. How long can you wait? You're waiting for the others that pray have a fuller tank to share, and you wait. And you're sinking, not rising to the surface. How long can you really wait? Or perhaps you are stranded on a deserted island. There is no one. You run, then walk, then crawl the perimeter of the island, and a ship passes you by. You cry, you plead, you beg to the heavens, someone help me. Oh God, please, someone help me. But what if it isn't you that you're fighting for that breath? Or what if that ship, or what if you're on that ship that's going by and you are trying to throw a lifeline out? I've felt this many, many times, more times than I have fingers and toes. And how do I breathe? Sometimes like a fish out of water flopping on the sand, not so gracefully. How do I help the one fighting for breath or the one trying to get off the island? By taking them to where the services are to be provided. It's not so easy when you work where the services are provided. You call the ambulance to take your teen to the hospital, intoxicated, past the point where it is safe for them to be monitored at home. Yes, they took a bottle of alcohol to friends and drank it all with no idea of exactly what they were drinking. To them, booze is booze, a couple bottles of beer, a bottle of rum, all in fun, being cool and acting grown up, until their friend's mom contacts you and says, they can't wake up your kid, 4 p.m. on a Friday, and there's an empty bottle of Captain Morgan in the room. So you rush to the friend's house, call the ambulance, and then go to the hospital. Where did they get the booze, they ask, and how much did they drink? In the cupboard, I think, maybe all of it. They flush their system with intravenous fluids and they wake up, fists flying and swearing. You are embarrassed as they are using profanity and racist remarks and threatening to punch the staff. And the staff member remarks, you do that, Missy, and I'll punch you right back. And that is an employee where you work. So what do you as a parent, as a nurse say? Sometimes you say nothing and you hope that nurse will come up to you one day and say, I'm sorry I responded that way. Or how is your kid doing? And I'm still holding my breath. What do you do when you've had so many sleepless nights, watching and looking and waiting for them to walk through that door? And when they do, they're high. And what's the big deal, Mom? Why are you making such a big issue of it? Because I am tired. I feel like I'm running around that island trying to help you and find you help. And then I go to work and I keep it to myself, as who would understand? I sit in the break room trying and breathe without thinking and worrying, what are they up to? My coworkers are so happy. Someone's child, grandchild has accomplished graduating with honors or graduating with a degree. Someone else's has made the NHL. It's all on the front page of the paper. And then there's the days when the paper mysteriously isn't in the staff room, as a kind coworker has taken it out. My loved one's latest criminal charges are on the front page again. And no one calls, messages, or approaches you, even a tap on the shoulder and says, hang in there. The few times when they do, they say, I can't imagine what you're going through. And you are thankful yet embarrassed as the tears well up in your eyes as you try to hold it together. Your adult child is not a secret, has substance use disorder. No one asks, how are they doing? No one says, you've done a great job and you must be so proud, yet you're working harder than any of them. You think of the sleepless nights, the advocating, the repairs to the house again and again, the broken doors, the thrown dishes, the tough love, the what do I do moments over and over. They've crashed my car. They've broken another window, another door. Someone has written on the town page on Facebook about the fear their parent has in their apartment building, living with someone wielding a knife down the hall. And you know they are talking about your adult child who is in a drug-induced psychosis. And you have to face another parent, when you're making the insurance claim, if you have kids the same age and played on the same sports teams. You have to discuss work with a friend of the Facebook poster, and you hope they say nothing, as you don't want to say a thing. You don't want to hear how awful it is living in that building. A disgrace. The number of times you call the emergency department to find out if your child is there, as you haven't heard from them, and you're worried, and you find out they are there, in rough shape, unkempt, face full of sores, dirty, and you worry, are they coming through this time? Or the calls from friends of your son or daughter, they've overdosed or in emergency. You drive in silence, wanting to vomit, scream, or cry, wondering if they are alive or brain dead, or you can't even think of the alternatives. Yet you are faced with the thoughts all too often. And if you have experienced the loss, I'm so sorry, and my heart truly bleeds for you. When your child is admitted, you advocate they are not mentally competent. The drugs have taken over. The psychosis is in full boom. Yes, boom, as it is not a beautiful taking over as when a flower reaches its peak. The staff calls for you to be a sitter. Your offspring is restless. You've told them day 3 of withdrawal is bad. You've been down this highway to hell before. And when all hell breaks loose, you try and save their IV to get them those medications quicker, while your offspring is yelling such profanity and racist remarks at auxiliary staff. Your loved one is calling you every name imaginable as you won't take them out of the chair they're in. You're the reason I'm here, Mom. Just let me leave. And they can't even walk as they've damaged their body so badly. And you're told to leave, as the code is called for a violent patient. And you know the restraints are coming out. And you cry as it is now to the point where you know you can't breathe or take the ship to that island. The lifeline comes up short, your tank is empty, so you try to sleep, and if you do, you wake, you think, is this really my life? Or did I have a nightmare? You are thankful for the little things, the staff who connects with your sufferer. Yes, sufferer. For the one with the disorder is suffering, but they can't see it for the drugs cloud their judgment. You will know that staff member. They smile when they see you, ask you how you are. They ask how your son or daughter is doing, or if they see them, they speak to them out on the streets. They try and talk to them about leaving against medical advice. You know it's going to happen, and you are so thankful that they value your input for their patient, your child, the one with the frequent flyer number. There remains that niggling thought in your head when your loved one has scabs and wounds on their face, needle marks and dirt between their toes, and filthy, stinking clothes. I hope they don't think that we live this way. Or what did they do to those kids that they are like this? Or even worse, there's the silence when a physician has been consulted to see your kid and they avoid eye contact with you. Like they don't know you at all. So you say, hey, don't you miss me? As you've worked with that physician for years with them every week. What you do want the people in your workplace to know, they have not always been like this. They are not always like this. When they are clean, they are wonderful, kind, caring individuals. I brought them here as a last resort. If I could have dealt with this on my own, I would have. Right now, you are our ship, our oxygen tank. Treat us kindly and compassionately, for I pray you never have to be in the position we face. Addiction is a family disease. It affects many generations. Those who don't use are still affected. Advocate as though my loved one is yours. As for me, I will continue to speak out, to attempt to alleviate the stigma we face raising and loving someone with substance use disorder. I reach out to patients' families. I do understand. It's hard when your coworkers' biggest worry seems to be their daughter's prom dress, and you do not get to experience those moments in life. I've had patients yelling at me that I have the perfect life and the perfect family, and I just come to work and I don't understand how hard it is. If only they knew. I've been with family members as their loved ones have passed from overdosing. I've seen the pain. I've heard the mother's cries. And in those moments, I too have had tears run down my cheeks. As I can't ever say it will never be me. And I kneel next to them and offer support. Some tips that are hard but are must-dos. We must find the laughter. I figure our family story would make a great HBO series. We've got shameless beat. Some days you just have to laugh after the pain of being in situations you've never dreamt of. Have family and friends who understand the joy and pain. Try and find some peace within yourself. Pray, meditate, seek solace in a higher power, as there is no magic answer, no magic pathway or algorithm. Hibernate if you must, for advocating makes us like a bear. Walk in the sun, eat and hydrate your physical being, even though it may be a huge undertaking. Wonder at a tree, look at the scars and bark of it. Growing isn't always easy, and the twists and turns of the tree show signs of a struggle. Not every tree grows straight up. And remember, you aren't the only tree in the forest. In numbers, there will be enough oxygen tanks, so no one is struggling to find their breath. In numbers, there will be enough lifelines to link together to throw to the island. Join a support group to help increase those oxygen tanks and lifelines. My name is Tracy. I am a nurse. I love someone who has substance use disorder. I am their parent. I am their mom. I love them. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Tracy. That was beautiful. And your story, like the other stories that we heard today, they resonate with, I'm sure, many people on this call, if not everyone. I'm sure somebody got a little piece from what everyone had to say. And so, I just kind of wanted to mention that, or just acknowledge, I guess, that the stories that you four have shared today have been really heavy. And, we appreciate the vulnerability that it took to share those stories. But I also kind of wanted to make sure that the people who are on the call, as well as the speakers and Antoinette and myself, all of us, that we make sure that we do some self-care this evening, because this has been a lot on our hearts. And so I just want to thank you all for that. I don't think we had any questions that came up. And so if anybody does have any questions later on, please feel free to send them along to Antoinette. And then the final thing that we wanted to kind of bring up was about ways to end stigma. And I know we're almost out of time, so we don't really have a lot of time to chat about that. But if anybody has ideas for ways that we can improve the experience of either our loved ones or our Holding Hope group loved ones, any slogan ideas or anything like that, please send those along as well. And that could be a future topic for, I don't know if I'm, that's the, actual what you guys are planning to do with that or not, but maybe it would be the topic for a future webinar. So thanks everyone for coming. I'm going to turn it back over to Antoinette. Antoinette, we can't hear you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Emily, for all of your navigating and words, and thank you for all of our speakers for sharing your hearts, and for everybody who's here listening today. And I know that every single person here has their own sharing that they could absolutely do. The intent of this was to bring up and to look at what is the stigma that families encounter, and those conversations, I think, can be ongoing and I did pop in the chat. We wouldn't have time to go today, but there is a plan to anybody that's interested in working on a campaign to reduce stigma. If you have ideas and suggestions, to please email me. I put my email address in the chat, and you can also find me lots of places. And we are going to have another Zoom call to, I'll collate what people send in. I have a Jamboard, or if you want to send some of those, I'll put it together, and then we'll have a Zoom call to start to put together some strategies on how we can do that. Locally, I know I'm working on that. So there's some different things coming together for that. So I just want you to know that we want to do more than talk about it today. You know, my background, stigma is more deadly than drugs. Hashtag we see you. Geographically, the area that I live in, my Mom Stop the Harm local kind of members came up with that as a campaign, and we started selling those t-shirts because that was one of their slogans. So things that I'm looking for or thinking about is what other slogans, you know, I didn't come up with that. Somebody creative did, and so how can we bring out different slogans? What can we do? How do we bring this forward? I truly believe that that is true, and we need to start to educate people around stigma, as our speakers did today. What is the incredible impact that stigma has? So as we can move the stigma, bring the conversations forward like we're having today, and hear from one another, that is going to be how we make a difference. So I've put that in the chat, and I just wanted to say again, thank you to all of our panelists for your vulnerability, for your sharing. I think I know everybody was a little bit nervous, but it's when you get in front of an audience and you're sharing your heart, that's what I think touches lives. And as we share our hearts with one another, that's what opens hearts as well. I am going to ask Evie if Evie can come on in a second. Evie has a beautiful way of bringing people together at the end, and just to do a few collective breaths. Again, I'll reiterate what Emily said. It was a lot of heavy things that we talk about, and we need to have self-compassion. How do we care for ourselves and have compassion for ourselves? So encouraging everybody to do something to move that, just to be able to care for yourself as we leave. And Evie, I'll hand it over to you, and then I look forward to hearing from people further.
Thank you, Antoinette. So what I like to do is acknowledge, of course, the heartbreak that we're all sharing and the tenderness that we're walking in. And the way that we survive this is through the collective. And I think one of the ways that we can feel close to each other, even though we're in a virtual context here, is to understand that we all share air and breath. And so I'd ask you all to join in to breathe 3 times together. Let's put our hands on our hearts for ourselves and all our loved ones. And together at the count of 3, let's do 3 deep breaths, acknowledging our deep connection. 1, 2, 3. Thank you so very much to everyone.
Thank you for that, Evie. Take care, everybody, and have a gentle evening.